Good evening and welcome to the latest interview in ACS's Industry Insights Leader Series. This series features Australian tech professionals who share their expertise on how technology and innovation transforms and shapes our economy. My name is Daniel Rayhanna, Chief Operations Officer of ACS, and I'll be your host this evening. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Tonight our guest is Sarah McCullough, CIO of Essential Energy. Sarah joined Essential Energy in 2018 as the head of e-tech operations and has been acting as the Chief Information Officer since April 2019. Sarah is an innovation senior leader and certified organisational change manager. Amongst her many missions, she's been leading the digital transformation journey being undertaken by Essential Energy in 2019 through to 2020. Well, please join me in welcoming Sarah and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks very much, Daniel.
So let's get cracking. You've had a really diverse career that's led you to become the CEO of Essential Energy. Could you share a bit of that journey with us and how you've reached the position you're at today?
Sure. So I have a non-traditional background, and the story of how I got into IT is an interesting one. I actually undertook commerce law at university and I did it very poorly. In fact, I was excellent at everything except for being a student, I'd say. And through that journey, it really made me realise what I was passionate about, and that's working with people and working with technology. And from university, I left in fifth year without achieving either degree to go and undertake some time working in hospitality. I did that for a while and ran a family business. And post that, I decided it was time to explore something else I'm passionate about, and that was scuba diving. So I became a scuba diving instructor and was teaching diving in Sydney Harbour to and anyone who wanted to learn scuba diving. And one winter, I was teaching scuba diving. I thought, this is really, really cold, and I need to get myself an office job. And I don't think I'm going to last the whole winter. So I re-skilled at night school and I went and studied some Microsoft certifications and I got my first job in technology unboxing computers out at the airport. And that was the start of my IT career. And from there, I've had a variety of roles. I've been lucky enough to work in applications, programs, project delivery, service delivery, customer experience. I've done some service desk. And worked my way through my career up, and now I'm the Chief Information Officer, lucky enough to be at Essential Energy.
Right, thank
you.
That's
a bit about me, Dan.
So during that journey, who were some of the sort of Australian tech icons that you looked up to, and some of those mentors, and how has seeking the right mentorship help advance your career through those various stages?
Yeah, sure. I think more so than tech icons, I always had a number of business icons who I really looked up to, and particularly admired individuals who can achieve so much in their field at such a young age. So I've had a number of inspirations through that. But in terms of mentorship, I'd call out a few things. One is that I've been really fortunate in my career to work with amazing individuals who foster and grow talent. And a couple of my bosses were just sensational in, identifying ambition, helping you with that talent and helping you, get a leg up in an organisation. So that's been key to me, the people who I've been lucky enough to have as bosses. The second thing I'd say is that the peers I've been lucky enough to work with, I often and always acknowledge that I'm so lucky to work with people who are smarter than me always, and that helps uplift the general, what you can achieve is always higher as a team. So I've always been lucky enough to work with really lovely people who I consider friends as well as peers. So that's certainly helped. And finally, I have a very supportive family and partner and my parents, and they've always been very strong advocates for me. So I think between my network of great bosses, great people I get to work with, and good support at home, I think they've all helped with my career. But certainly, being honest and clear with your boss about where you want to be and driving your ambition is a good way to go.
Yeah, thank you very much. So before we dive into sort of the energy, water and utilities sector specifically, are there any technologies, deep emerging technologies that have you interested at the moment?
Yeah, sure. I think for me personally, I've been spending a lot of time lately understanding a bit more around cybersecurity, and I'm fascinated by all things cyber. But it particularly gives a lens on all the emerging technologies and how we need to be so mindful of security by design as we look at that. In terms of specific technologies that I personally am really interested in, I'm very interested in seeing where wearables go and where that as a technology has its applicability. And I'm also fascinated by this concept of video and big data. So how we're using video imagery and big data to really understand and analyse so much more. And that could be a good segue, Dan, if possible, to talk about what Essential Energy does as the next thing, because I think one of the real competitive advantages that the industry is looking at is how do we use video imagery more effectively.
Yep.
And that could be, the use of drones, which is pretty cool. We've got a fleet of drones and drone pilots at Essential Energy for, asset inspection, but also how do we look at citizen development of, taking imagery, being able to utilise that from multiple sources and then creating a better outcome for the whole sector, not just for individual organisations. So there's quite a lot there that Essential Energy is very progressive on.
No, thank you, Sarah. And if you could you just give us a bit of a rundown on what Essential actually does, what the remit is?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I'm very proud to work for Essential Energy. It's a fantastic organisation. We're a state-owned corporation. We distribute the energy for rural and regional New South Wales. We've got around 855,000 customers. So if you live regionally like I do, you call Essential Energy if there's a fault, and we will come and restore power. And additionally, we have a water business. So if you live in Broken Hill in the area, we're also your water provider. Essential Energy does that energy distribution for around 95% of New South Wales and some parts of southern Queensland. And in terms of our footprint, we've got around 1,500 power lines. So there's a huge asset base and a huge footprint that we service. We've got around 3,000 employees in those areas, and the Essential Energy services that we provide are classified as, and as the name alludes, as essential services. So it's fantastic to work for an organisation where you know the outcome's important because you're literally keeping the lights on.
Thanks.
Excuse the bad pun there. I've got plenty more of them.
That's okay. So let's dive into a bit more about what you do. And you've embarked recently on a 5-year digital transformation project. What's been the rationale behind that move, and what opportunities and challenges do you foresee on this journey?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. We have undertaken a 5-year transformation journey. The reason we're doing that is because Essential Energy contributes around 38% of your power bill at home, and we are very keen to continue to put downward pressure on those energy prices, of which we've been successful in doing so far. And through that, we need to look at how we're delivering those services. And a big part of that is looking at our internal systems, which Essential Energy formed from a series of county councils coming together. And so with that, all of our systems have sort of combined, and we've had a number of legacy systems through that process. So the transformation is really around how do we transform those legacy systems, but taking a business-led approach. So really looking at people, process, and replacing those core systems and transforming our business through that way. So the transformation journey will see us replace core internal legacy systems such as our enterprise resource planning system. We're looking at our asset management system because, as I mentioned before, huge asset base, 1.3 million poles we look after. So a lot of assets and a huge workforce to help us do that, obviously. So it's how do we optimise through technology in a business-led way, and that's really what our digital transformation is about.
Thank you. And Sarah, I saw that since 2012-13, you've managed to reduce power bills by about 40%, but you've still got a task ahead of you to keep reducing that by another 8%. How do you do, or have you started to make that transition with your current team members? What technologies have you brought in as part of that journey so far?
Yeah, we, as I mentioned, we're looking at those technologies that underpin our core systems. A big part of our transformation as well is upskilling and making sure that our team, as we mentioned offline, we're a registered training organisation as well. So there's a lot of upskilling of our team. But in terms of digital technologies that we're looking at implementing, I find Essential Energy, being new to the organisation and industry, very, very innovative. And it's things such as field-based tools that we're looking at, using agile methodologies to deliver applications into our field. And we have a large iDevice fleet, so looking at how do we better utilise that. As I mentioned before, video imagery and spatial systems. So how do we better understand our assets through those mechanisms? And I think we have a huge opportunity to look at data and big data, and how do we take all the information that we have on our asset base and on the health and combine that with the information we receive from services such as the weather to make better informed decisions. And all of these things will lead to the more productive operation of our network. And as I mentioned, downward pressure on energy prices for New South Wales.
Thank you. So, look, the utilities and energy sector has undergone significant shifts, and it's changing fundamentally how customers and energy providers interact. A lot of media, highly regulated sector. How the traditional supply chain model arising from the centralised energy generation is being challenged. How do you remain customer-centric and focused during such wide transformation and regulation, and through that regulation, rather?
Yeah, we Essential Energy is doing this very well, I think. There's two sort of components there. One is taking a customer experience lens and a customer-centric approach, which is one part of our transformation, putting the customer at the heart of everything we do. And the second is, as an industry, we're looking at, we are part of the Energy Charter. So we've signed up to the Energy Charter, and that really looks at how do we deliver better customer outcomes across the industry. So I think customer centricity is the key. And I also think that the energy industry is changing rapidly, and there's a number of things around that are being driven by that, by the change in the reform. So that's things such as solar, tariff reform, the increased choice in the market, climate change is a prime example. Electric vehicles, hybrid, there's so many components that are sort of shaping what that looks like. And we really need, to make sure that the technologies we're investing in, and I keep coming back to data, the importance of having data from those accurate sources to make those right decisions is really, really critical. And that's one of the components. I think the other thing that has a big part to play there is within the industry, the utilisation or the installation of smart meters. I think that's going to be something New South Wales will benefit from. And that basically gives us more accurate and more timely data to help make those decisions and control the network, as I mentioned. And we need to continue in everything we do with the security by design, and making sure that we're a critical infrastructure provider, so making sure that we are being very mindful of that security focus.
Thank you. So we often ask the question about how do you get board investment into a digital transformation strategy or project, and particularly now given the conservative climate. But could I reshape a little bit differently and just ask how you brought your team along for the journey, and then sort of you've already acknowledged through sort of some of your literature and your report included that the size, shape of your organisation and team may change. What approach have you taken, particularly from a technology perspective, given the scope and size of the organisation?
Yeah, I think that there's a really strong requirement for everyone in our industry, in the technology industry, to acknowledge and continue the reskilling of themselves as an individual and the uplift. And so that's something that I'm quite passionate about. And that's, as technologists, our journey actually never ends in terms of learning. So it's how do we keep reskilling, upskilling, thinking about things differently. My personal approach to this is I think we need to articulate the why. So why are we transforming? Why are we implementing new technologies? And any digital transformation should be brought into through a business lens, in my opinion. So I'm not into implementing technology for technology's sake. And there's a lot of really cool stuff that I'd love to roll out, but unless it's incrementally adding value to the business and specifically adding value for me personally to a field-based, we're a very heavy field-based business. So we need to be quite focused on, making those right decisions that make it easier for us to plan, to execute better, and to give the right information at the right time to the right people. And so that's all around that, digitisation and right contextual information while using technology. So there's a big bit there, and there's a big bit around everyone having a role to play in terms of upskilling themselves.
Thank you, and a really diverse workforce with a big field team. So good luck with the continued journey there. We've spoken a little bit about cybersecurity, and only last month the Prime Minister highlighted that Australian businesses are facing increasing online threats and attacks. In your experience as a CIO and within your own business, how are Australian businesses positioned to tackle these threats, and what's your advice to them?
I think it was fantastic to see our PM raising the awareness around cybersecurity last month, as he did, and I think the attack is constant and persistent, as he stated, and shouldn't be undercooked. And I feel that we have been undercooking cyber probably for some time. The importance is definitely felt and well known within our industry. But perhaps I also have experience with my parents run a small business. And I know their spend on cyber is significantly different to that of organisations, and particularly technology organisations. But their awareness of the need for it has been heightened through that activity. So, look, I think it was good to give it that visibility, and my sense is that we all need to up the ante around cybersecurity, and I personally, that's been a big focus for me in the last 18 months around not only understanding the requirements from a critical infrastructure provider, which Essential Energy is, but also being more familiar and cyber savvy with the decisions that we need to make across the board. So if anyone's listening on who has an interest in cyber, you are very well placed in your industry, because I think it will be an explosion.
Thank you. So it's hard to talk about cyber without talking about data. How does Essential Energy ensure public data in particular remains secure, and that data privacy, consent and the like isn't compromised in this environment, particularly with the number of devices and infrastructure that you've got out there in the regional network in particular?
Yeah, we at Essential Energy have New South Wales licence conditions, of which we abide by, and obviously we're regulated by the same data privacy policies across the board. So we have quite a solid approach in this regard, of which we're meeting and complying to. I would say that data, cyber, and people are the sort of three foundations that we all need to think about as we go through the digital journey and the digital transformation, because I think your data is probably only going to be as secure as, human error is definitely a factor there in a lot of cases, and a lot of it is non-malicious. So it really needs to be an education process as well.
Thank you. A recent report by Fathom AI highlighted that we have the potential to create 5.6 million new jobs if we invest in skills development. It's an area that you're passionate about, and we've spoken about or touched on at least a little bit. What skills are are really important to you as a CIO, and what are those that you think will be relevant in the future of work?
Sure, great question. For me personally, what I'm looking for, and we touched on cyber before, I think there's a great requirement around data, but we also need fantastic communicators. So, you know, one of the skills that I look for is attitude and communication. So, as well as the technical hard skills that people are probably learning and going to university, there's a very strong need, from my perspective, to be able to communicate that and have the right attitude and be able to take on board problems, analyse them, and spit out outcomes. So I think soft skills are really, really important. I think investment in skills development, high growth areas that I can see are around cyber, as we mentioned, business analysts, always in demand for good BAs, which is interesting given all the other roles. Data scientists and data analysts, I think, will be a growth area. And the other one that I'd say is strong management and leadership, because as we invest more in technology, we also need to be able to bridge the gap and communicate between business and IT more effectively. And we've been talking about this as a journey and as an industry for quite some time, but I think there's great value in having really strong communicators and being able to deliver business value.
Thank you. ACS Australia's Digital Pulse report highlights that there's still a big gap between supply and demand of tech workers. How do you attract and keep the best talent within your own organisation? And obviously that's with a regional lens, being based in Port Macquarie. I'd imagine you get the pick of the crop, but you've still invested in apprenticeship, traineeship programs and the like. How does that work for you?
Yeah, we're very lucky. I've got a fantastic team in Essential Energy, and hopefully some of them could join tonight. But we are very lucky with the talent that we have. Interestingly though, attracting talent to a regional and rural area has been challenging, and certainly some of those roles I mentioned, getting the right people in Port Macquarie has been hard. But I really think with COVID, we're going to see that this ability to work remotely and from anywhere will open up the talent market a lot more. So I think that's a real positive, and that'll definitely shine through. The other thing I'd state is that we're investing in graduate programs and undergrad and the like, and apprenticeships in our field, which is really important, because one of the big requirements for tech skills is also to be able to understand the business. So regardless of where you work, if that's deep industry knowledge or if it's deep technical knowledge, there's a real advantage to that.
Thank you. Same report, women still only make up 28% of the ICT workforce, and there's a disparity between women in senior leadership positions within organisations. As a female CIO in Australia, have you ever faced challenges yourself, and what advice would you provide to those aspiring into a C-level role?
Yeah, great question. And look, it's continually alarming, the statistics on women in the workforce, and particularly women in STEM roles and ICT area. I personally have been blessed in my career that I've been supported by really strong leaders, most of them male, as mentors. So I've actually felt very empowered and supported, but I am frequently the only female in the room. And I think with gender diversity as well as cultural diversity and any type of diversity, the real benefit we get is from the difference in thinking. So I think that it's such a shame that we still have this gap, and we all need to work a lot harder to close it. One of the things that my one perhaps piece of advice, better to put, is that old adage around females will apply for the job when you've got 100% of the skills, and male would put it in a CV at less than 50% of the skills, I think is very apt and true. And so I just encourage everyone, be ambitious, be really clear about your goals, get into it and tell people about them, because when you talk about it, you get buy-in from your team members as well, you get feedback, and you'll find people in your career who want to help you. So we all need to actually work harder to close this gap, and there's a huge part for males there as well in terms of allowing space for that voice. if you are, in a room and it is mainly males, you need to make space for that voice. And similarly, for females to realise you can probably achieve more than you think you can. You've just got to get into it. So there's a bit of both ways there.
Thanks. And look, you're passionate about raising awareness of mental health and well-being across the tech sector. Obviously, an really unusual time, given sort of the COVID-19 arrangements and that impact. What are some of the major health challenges that you believe ICT professionals face, and again, some personal advice that you could offer?
Yeah, I think the mental health in any sector is a huge challenge and one in our society. And I found that it's particularly prevalent in the ICT sector. And that's potentially because as a group, we perhaps are more introverted than extroverted. And it's perhaps not as acceptable to talk about it and to go out for a coffee and express your feelings. And that's something that I'd love to see change. I think someone recently described mental health to me as being on a spectrum, and that we all experience mental health in varying ways at different stages. And that could be, someone feels pretty average one day a week, or it could be you actually have a period of depression. And as a industry and as a sector, I think that we need to try and break this wall down by being more personal with each other and checking in on a mate and checking in on a co-worker and making space in our daily banter on Slack, Teams, WhatsApp, text, email, whatever it is that you're using as your communication forum, to make that space to say, are you okay? And if someone's not, we do something about it. And that can be listening, taking them out for a coffee, raising it with them to say, if you want to talk, when you want to talk, let me know. But there's a whole range of things there that we can do that are really simple. And I do feel that, particularly in the time of COVID, where probably more of us are more isolated than even normal, it's a great period to check in on someone and check in how they're personally going with the journey.
Thank you. Sarah, what are some of the biggest challenges you've faced, particularly when sort of integrating or working with business? There's obviously much more convergence between teams now. What have you learnt from it, and sort of what advice would you give to those that are managing projects and working really closely with other teams?
Yeah, sure. I feel like I've had quite a few challenges, and depending on the day and the week, they change, and the year. But a couple of things I'd state. I think IT and our customers, we need to become closer. So, the relationship piece is really important. And whenever I think about when things haven't gone well, I haven't worked hard enough at the relationship to have that sort of dialogue or communication open. And sometimes the technical things that don't go well, be that project going poorly or you have an outage, you can always make it better with increased communication or better communication. The second thing I'd probably state there is that things will always go poorly, but you need to trust your gut. So I think where I've waited and thought, oh no, that's not actually what's happening, or oh yeah, we'll just give it a bit of time, I've always regretted that in hindsight. So there isn't a sixth sense or an instinct that you need to build, that if you think something's not right, you should probably get into it earlier. And I think that I haven't trusted my gut and reacted fast enough at times. And other challenges, I think, are around actual technologies, where we're trying to fit in something that perhaps we haven't considered enough the business process around how they're going to use the tool. So where we buy something and we utilise the 5% of it and haven't quite thought through, how's this going to work? And I've certainly learned a lot through my journey, and there's some of the things. Trust your gut, communicate more than less. If it smells like it's not right, it's probably not right. And get in and go harder earlier.
Thanks. Could I just ask you one sort of extension to one of those? And you do see it quite often, where there's a product that's purchased, you don't really understand all the use cases for it, but you do find you're underutilising it in the end. What advice do you give to your team about how to engage with the business and that our members and viewers could take away from tonight to almost become that trusted advisor?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dan, and I think that's very aspirational from myself. I do want to be a trusted advisor, and we want to go from sort of an order taker, or yes, IT, no IT, do this IT, to being able to have those dialogues and conversations with our customers more frequently. Look, I think there's a few things. Having a blueprint and an architecture that you use to make sure that if you're buying a tool, you understand what for is really critical. And then also understanding the business use case before you buy the tool. So quite often it's buy the tool and then we'll work out the problem. So going the other way around. And finally, having a really strong business partnering engagement where you can understand what the customer is trying to achieve, and then you can see solutions for the tool that you've already used in the 5% off. So really, getting the most out of that total cost of ownership is really important. Because I think if we ask everyone on the call, we've probably all got a piece of software that we're using 1 or 2%, paying for 100, and we could find 100 use cases for it to get more out of bang for the buck, but that only works if it's part of the grand plan. So the blueprint and the architecture bit's really important.
Thank you. So what changes in terms of the energy sector have got you most excited about the future?
Yeah, I think the change in the energy sector is very, very exciting. And one bit that I find fascinating is that video imagery, like how we're going to use drones, which we currently do. We use LiDAR from low-flying helicopters to take images and then use data and analytics to match those up to better manage our assets. And the optimization of those processes in the future is very, very interesting. I think the other area that I think is a huge area of opportunity is safety, fatigue, and mental health. So I mentioned earlier wearables, and I'm quite interested in how do we look at the consumerization of IT, such as most people have a watch that can tell you your heart rate, can tell you when you're stressed, can tell you when it's time to stand up. How do we make that part of our common work practice and really utilise that to increase the safety of the energy sector, which is a huge priority? And how do we use technology to help with mental health as well? So, what are the opportunities for us to either connect with each other better or understand mental health more effectively? They're all very exciting. And then I come back to data as well. Building a capability to use a massive amounts of data that we have from the Internet of Things, from sensors, from the new technologies we're going to deploy, is just no end of opportunity there.
Thanks. And what do you think you'll keep that you've learnt from the COVID situation, knowing that you've probably got a few team members on the line as well, so I don't want to sit you up. What positive has come out of this experience for you and the team?
But look, I definitely feel that COVID has been a silver lining in some regards. And Dan, we were talking about this offline, and everyone can probably hear my screaming kids upstairs, so I apologise. It's witching hour here. But I think the key thing to keep has been that work balance that we probably all got a bit better at through COVID. And I'm very, very keen to make sure that we embed that. The other thing with COVID that I think has been a silver lining, if there could be one from this terrible and unprecedented pandemic, is how much it's pushed forward digital transformation. So we've gone from, in some regards, IT being a back seat because it can operate without you, with paper, with whatever, to IT being front and centre, and we're really enabling a lot of workplaces to be able to be remote, in many cases overnight, and operate effectively. And it just opens up a world of opportunity in terms of, okay, what else can we digitise? So if our whole workforce hasn't printed in 6 months, do we need it? If we've been able to operate remotely, what else can we change? So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. So key things that I'll be looking to keep, digitisation, so pushing that forward, and specifically what tools can we deploy for people to be more effective working remotely. It opens up for us an amazing amount of capability and capacity now that everyone's working remotely. So you're not restricted to location anymore, which is fantastic. What digital technologies can we retire, which I think is a really exciting one. RIP faxing and printing, hopefully. So how do we look at those things? Also, how do we help people work around the times and the places that work for them? And for me personally, I love being home, so I get more time with my kids and it helps me balance my mental health. And for some people, that's not what it'll be. So we'll just hopefully take a more flexible approach.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for having the conversation with us. Our audience have submitted a few questions that they'd like me to run past you. So here we go. Given you graduated in law and business administration, was it hard for you to switch careers? And how do you keep up with changing IT industry trends?
So firstly, thank you for the question. I didn't graduate from law. I dropped out in 5th year, very spectacularly. My mum will recite the story for you. I did graduate with an MBA from Charles Sturt University, which I did whilst working full-time. And again, I was lucky to have a really supportive employer that I was working for. I actually find it hard to keep up with industry trends because there's so much happening in our exciting industry. So my advice for you there is I pick a few publications that I religiously read and then I skim everything else. So find the things that work for you and use those as your source of staying up to date and be selective about the events you attend. I do attend a lot of events and I find that I get a little nugget of gold out of each one and it's been valuable. So, get some literature you like, stay up to date with that, attend events and talk to people is another good way.
Thank you. Any suggestions on how to best educate cloud users about the security of logging credentials to safeguard them against cyber attacks?
Great question. I think there's two answers to that. One is, as IT administrators and professionals, we should make that as easy as possible to be as secure as possible. So look at your multi-factor authentication methods, make sure that we're educating and training our users and also making it as seamless as possible to be secure. And the second answer is I think we have to walk the talk there and lead people by example by showing them what good looks like. So most people, if they knew that you could crack it because it's in X seconds with a brute force attack, would do differently. So it is all about that education and uplift. But cloud in particular is a fantastic digital transformation that presents a whole host of new challenges. So we've just got to make it as easy as possible to be secure as possible.
Thank you. Do you think that remote monitoring technologies have kept pace with your needs, and how do you go about protecting the security of those assets?
That's a really good question, and one that if he was here, I'd defer to my head of network or cyber. But I'm not sure how they've kept up. But from my perspective, I don't feel like I have enough visibility on anything, and that's because everything's evolving so quickly. So if we were where we needed to be from a remote monitoring and networking perspective, something will change shortly. So we're always needing to make sure that that's something like security that we keep reiterating and addressing. So, it's certainly a critical capability because that's the alerting front door.
What are some of the signs of a bad culture in an organisation? How can you ensure a safe environment to look after your team's mental health?
That's a really great question. And I think the organisational culture characteristics are a really interesting subject, and I think we could talk on this for another hour. But look, I'll slightly change my answer to talk about what does a good culture look like, if that's okay. And that's one that people are honest, supported, and inclusive. And it's one where people take accountability for what they are accountable for. And I think when you have a supportive, open, honest, inclusive, transparent, and accountable organisation, that drives a safe place for the conversation on, I'm not feeling great, or this is where, I'm feeling uncomfortable. So There's many things that a bad culture looks like, but I'd rather focus on what does good look like. And I've seen that a culture that drives teamwork and people are able to be their authentic and honest selves, and everyone contribute and add value in whatever way they do. That's where I think we can really start to look after our teammates and our colleagues around mental health, and that's what I would like to drive for. And welcome any feedback on that as well.
Thanks. Can you please share some of the main advice you give to people that you've mentored or that you've got from your own mentors?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of things. One, be ambitious. So you can always achieve more than you think you can. And that's a lesson that I like to impart on everyone. So don't sit there going, I'm a BA, I really want to be a program manager one day. You need to be ambitious, and you can, if you're a business analyst, you can definitely be a project manager. And then if you're a project manager, you can definitely be a program manager. So keep aiming and keep being ambitious. And the other thing I got told once, which was really incredible, is that you've got to help other people the way that you've been helped. So part of your responsibility in whatever position you're in is to help out your team and colleagues and co-workers. So it's not just about your ambition and throwing people under the bus to get to the next rung up the ladder. Teamwork and helping everyone will ultimately lead to the success of the group, and that's good for everyone and good for your career. So be ambitious, look after your mates and colleagues, and always think about what you can do and aim higher than you are.
Thank you. You mentioned that early on in your career you worked in hospitality and in your family business. What principles did you learn from that experience, and how might the principles apply in your current role?
Yeah, great. That's a really good question, and I think my background being so diverse has really helped me extensively in my IT career, because I'm probably the least technical IT person that I know, but I have a great appreciation for technology. I love it and I'm passionate about it, but I don't have a deep coding background, and I don't have a deep. I find it really easy to not get dragged into the detail of how we're going to fix that specific technical thing. Working in family business taught me a lot of things. Perhaps most of all is patience. But it also, I got the opportunity at a really young age to learn about things such as teamwork, people management, how do you deal responsibly with money, and how do you turn over a business into a profit. But most importantly, how do you look after customers? And the customer centricity message is one that I try and impart on all the teams that I work with, because we as IT, we exist to serve our customers' needs, whatever they are, and to understand them. And you don't have technology just for technology's sake. So there really is that drive to let's understand, let's make sure we're hitting the mark, and let's be receptive to customer feedback. And interestingly, my scuba diving jaunt, which was short-lived because it's so cold, taught me a lot about teamwork again, and about the importance of safety. So safety in the workplace, safety and really important key value for Essential Energy.
Thank you. So a question that we've had by a lot of our recent graduates, what recommendations do you have for someone who is starting out their career in ICT, and how do they succeed in their first job?
Yeah, great question. My feedback there is it's all about your attitude. So show up, go hard, give everything a go. It doesn't matter if you don't have the skills yet, you'll get there. So just have a positive attitude, work hard, and take any job you can get. My first job was unboxing computers. And prior to that, I'd worked at university fixing the printer in the computer room. And I'm pretty happy to do anything, and that's how you start a career. You get in, you understand the business, have a great attitude, and go hard. So try anything, get your first job, you'll go from there.
Thank you. What do you believe Australia has a skilled workforce to deal with cyber threats that could be imminent?
That's a really good question. I've met a lot of really fantastic cyber professionals, mainly over the last 2 years, actually. I think we do. I think the cyber investment that the PM's making is very apt and appropriate. And I think that we need to utilise not only skilled professionals but technology as well in that space. So, yes, I think we do, and I also encourage those graduates to just ask that question. If you want to talk about a growth industry, there's a lot happening in cyber.
How do you manage the cost versus benefit when ensuring ongoing education and training for your staff to assist in employee turnover?
So cost versus benefit. I always think that it doesn't matter if the training's related to their current job or a future job or a past job. There is always benefit in doing training. So in terms of cost, I normally see it as money well spent, provided that the training's undertaken, of course. And that's a really important component in terms of not only retaining staff, but also promoting staff, which is something that every organisation wants to see, that you have turnover of your team because they're, being poached by another part of the business, and that, people come to you because they want your team due to their attitude or their problem-solving skills. So I think the outlay for training is normally worth it, in my experience. Got to be measured, of course, with where you're up to with your budget, but definitely that old adage of what happens if you train your staff and they leave, or what happens if you don't, is very appropriate.
What are your thoughts on the future of public-private cybersecurity partnerships?
Public-private cybersecurity partnerships, I think can only be a good thing. I'd like to see a bit more around the detail, but as an organisation and as an entity, we all need to focus more on cyber, I think, and that's been very apparent over the last month or so. So it just depends on the details of the individual arrangement.
Okay, with the poles and wires and the field force, you mentioned helicopters, I believe. Do you use FLIR, and how does the IT network handle the size and type of files?
I don't know is the answer to that one. And how do we handle the size and types of files is with difficulty previously, and it's been a piece of work that the team have been looking at, and they're going to utilise some cloud optimization storage to really help with that data analytics. But it certainly has been a challenge previously because the millions of images per sort of second that they can capture is huge. And I know it's certainly something that the teams have been working through. But that's a great question, and if anyone wants more detail, I think there's probably someone more appropriate at Essential I should hook you up with, because it's fascinating and it's amazing to see, not only the drones in work, but also the LiDAR that they utilise through the helicopter.
Thanks. Can you still rely on the data that you've been getting since the beginning of the COVID crisis, since we're living in such unusual times?
Good question. Certainly our data from the field is very reliable, and as I mentioned before, we've really done a lot on the digital transformation within the field, and we use iDevices, and we're trying proactively to digitise more and more. And certainly we haven't seen a drop in productivity. So depending on what data you're talking about, I think that COVID in that regard has not done us a disservice. But if you're speaking specifically about COVID data, I can't comment on that.
What about customer data, possibly as well? So have you noticed a difference in terms of how your customers and users are now using power?
Yeah, interesting around consumption. So I think that there has been some industry data published on that. I think there was predictions that consumption would be significantly different. I don't have the data in front of me for New South Wales. I know Victoria had a slight dip in consumption data, but I can find out for you. I think it was pretty consistent to date, because when you think about power consumption, whilst we might not be fraternising as much in large shopping centres, you've certainly got everyone working from home who was perhaps out of their house previously for 10 hours a day. You're now running, if it's anything like my house, you're running 5 devices and 2 heaters and everything else 24/7.
What jobs do you think will have to be created in the future to fulfil some of today and tomorrow's challenges?
Great question. So I certainly think that there's more of a place around security, which we've spoken about. I think that there's a huge gap in the market for skills around speaking technology and business together. So, those product owners, anyone who can translate those needs, there's a great market there. And the other one I'd say is that the agile capability, and I don't specifically mean you and do it frequently. There's a big plus there. So there's a number of new skills I see coming in, and certainly data and analytics capability will be a huge one.
Thanks. So you've worked in more than one industry. Do you see yourself staying in the tech sector for the long term? And if so, why, opposed to other industry sectors that you may choose to move into?
Yeah, great question. I actually asked myself that a few years ago and sort of thought, all right, well, do I want to be in IT or should I branch into something else? And I keep coming back to I love technology and I love people. So I like this industry. I like working in this space. What the future holds, I'm open to, but very much enjoy it now. And I think the rapid rate of change in our sector and certainly in the consumerisation of IT in our world keeps it pretty exciting. And I never go to work and think, I'm pretty over it. What's going to happen today? There's always something that comes up that keeps you interested and is certainly there's a lot to learn too. So I've got no end of learning to do yet. So that's positive.
What are the main challenges or advantages of working remotely? Is it still required to live and work in the same location?
Yeah, great question. I actually don't think it is. I think the biggest challenge is, and I find that I really miss, I miss the face-to-face and the banter and being able to talk to people around a pot plant and going out for coffee. But equally, COVID has proven that we can all be successful working remotely. So I think it eliminates a lot of the requirement to live and work in the same town. And certainly throughout my team, we have people based all over Australia who work for Essential Energy, which is headquartered in Port Macquarie with regional offices in Bathurst and Wagga. So that proves you can be anywhere. But I think it's up for the individual, and certainly I wouldn't let location be a distraction for you applying for roles. I think if you're looking for a job and you want to be somewhere and live somewhere else, work somewhere else, I just encourage you to have that open dialogue with your employer, because if you're the right individual, I don't see a restriction around location.
Thanks. So how do you balance work and family during COVID lockdown, especially for your two-year-old twins?
Yes, and again, as I said, I'm sorry about that noise. There's a couple of head colds in this house, which leads to some grizzly bears upstairs. I've actually found it easier than ever to balance work and life. For me personally, I get up early, I exercise, I do some work, and then I go upstairs and see the kids. And just having that 15 minutes that I didn't have when I was working in the office is beautiful. And I love between meetings, I go upstairs, get a cup of tea and say hello. So for me, that's really been excellent. But the way I balance it is every afternoon, bar today, I knock off around 5. I spend time with the kids and I have a block of time. And then if I need to catch up on the work that I've missed, I do that after hours when they go to bed. And everyone I work with is very supportive of that. And I think that it's one of those things that you need to lead with, that I'm making time for the kids. I also take time out of my calendar during the week if there's special events that I want to attend, be that kindy gym or whatever it is, so that I plug that into my schedule and plan around it so that I can get that balance.
Nice. What's best practice procedure to follow in case of a security breach?
Good question, and I feel like I've been living this. I encourage everyone to have a cyber incident response plan done early before you have an incident. And if you haven't already checked it out, there's some fantastic resources on the Australian Cybersecurity Centre website, and you can look at that. And they've even got his an incident sort of response playbook. But depending on the incident, I would say it depends. And I would certainly say it helps to have prepared one earlier. So, and for me personally, being a critical infrastructure provider at Essential Energy, we also have some regulatory requirements and some procedures that we'd be following in that instance, touch wood.
Thanks. Is it safe to outsource a cybersecurity specialist or rather to create one within your own organisation? What do you think other organisations would prefer?
I think that organisation, and it depends on your needs. I think there's definitely value in maintaining a cybersecurity function internally, and that's my personal opinion. Because only then do you really understand the criticality of whatever the incident is related to your business. And that's really back to my point earlier around the value in having people communicate business and tech together and being able to speak that language. But certainly cybersecurity is critical and it needs to be married with the importance of whatever the functional process is to the business.
Thanks, Sarah. And final question, what's a component of your digital transformation strategy that is getting you the most excited?
Sorry, Dan, you cut out at the end. That is getting the most...
That's got you the most excited.
Oh, the most excited. Oh, great question. There's so much. I'm really inspired and excited by our digitisation programs and what we're doing with data. I'm also very excited to replace some legacy systems. I think that's every CIO's dream, which is excellent. So cleaning up our backyard, if you will. And the other piece that I think is awesome is our customer experience. And so how we're putting customer centricity at the heart of what we're doing. And that's people, process and technology change. So there's so much there that's going on that's awesome. And just, you know, some of the technologies we touched on today that Essential's looking at, including what we currently use, but looking at also extending, you know, around drones, around the digitisation in the field, around how do we use consumable technologies more effectively to help us solve business problems and ensure the safety of our teams is really exciting. And then the other big linchpin of transformation from a technology standpoint is uplifting our cybersecurity posture. So that is also, you know, one, a necessity, but two, pretty exciting when you can look at how far that's come in such a short time.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, for joining us, and thank you to our ACS members and audience for joining us this evening for our latest Industry Insights Leader Series. Please register for next week's session where we'll be featuring David Thodey, Deputy Chair of the COVID-19 Commission for the Prime Minister. Have a good evening and thank you again.